So much, Brother Joe. Just as far as announcements, April the 19th, that's the Saturday before Easter, we will have an egg stuffing party and stuff eggs for our Easter egg hunt, and then we'll also deliver eggs and the gospel to people's houses on that Saturday for an excellent delivery service. And so mark your calendars for April the 19th and help us do that. That's usually a pretty encouraging time. And then before we get into the message, before we open our Bibles tonight, I just thought to do this, but Miss Pam Scott is here with us tonight. Many of you have met Miss Pam over the last couple of weeks, but her husband pastored in California. How many years was he the pastor? Since 91. I was barely even born then. I'm just kidding. Brother Danny Scott was... Matter of fact, I met him my first year out here, and Brother Danny Scott was always a good friend and encourager to me. So Miss Pam's going back home next week or this week? Next Monday, going back to California out here visiting, and we appreciate her blessing us with her presence while she's here in Mesa. I don't mean to embarrass you, but I do want people to know who you are, and Brother Danny was a good friend to me for many years. Matter of fact, Randy, you have met him. Do you remember him? Yeah. You were out there and to that family camp we went to for so many years. Yeah. All right, if you have your Bibles, take them and turn with me to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. You know that we're looking at the life of Peter, and we have a lot of information tonight. So do y'all mind if we go overtime tonight? Would that be okay with everybody? Randy said no, and Brother Jeff said yeah. Y'all discuss it. Let y'all decide. I'm going to try to share. This is an amazing story in the Bible, an amazing situation, amazing scene, and so many things we can learn. Faith for the impossible is what we're looking at, what the subject that we're going to spend some time on tonight. Matthew 14. And let's read this story, let's read this passage, and then keep your Bibles open. We'll begin in verse 22. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him on the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves. For the wind was contrary, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried for fear, but straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it's really you, if it be thou, bid me come out unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. When Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Many of you know that whenever we were in Israel, we got to go on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and it actually was storming. The boat was rocking, knocking up against the pier, storming so much that a couple in our group was like, "No, we're not getting on there." And I said, "It's storming on the Sea of Galilee. Of course, we're getting on this boat. We're going." And then we actually went to the very spot where Jesus and Peter walked on the water. You could still see their footprints on the water. It was really cool. That last part I made up, just in case you're curious. Verse 29, he said, Come, and when Peter was come down to the ship, he walked on the water to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and called him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were coming to the ship, the wind ceased. And they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. Peter made numerous trips on the Sea of Galilee in his lifetime. Before becoming a disciple of Christ, he had been a fisherman by trade, which would account for much of his time on the water and a fishing vessel on the Sea of Galilee. Does anybody know, do you have any idea the width, the length of the Sea of Galilee, how wide across it is, how long it is, how wide? I was there and saw it, and I'm actually surprised at the width and length of it. To me, it just seemed like you think Sea of Galilee, and you see it on a map, right? If you've looked at Israel, you can see the Sea of Galilee, and it's kind of almost like a diamond shape, and it's not really a diamond, but it starts at a point and goes out to a point and comes back together. But it was a lot smaller than I envisioned it in my mind reading the Scriptures. It's 13 at its widest point. It is 13 miles across, and at its longest point, it is just over 13 miles in length. So Peter had spent a lot of time on the Sea of Galilee. Even after being a disciple of Christ, they made excursions on the Sea of Galilee. That's how they would get from town to town along the Sea of Galilee. Obviously, they didn't have vehicles, and so the quickest route would be get in the water, get in a boat, cross the water, and get there. And so this trip would have been one of the most memorable for Peter, don't you think? Of all the times he's on the Sea of Galilee, I imagine this would be the time that he would remember. Now, just before this, there was a great miracle. Jesus had fed 5,000 men, not accounting for women and children, fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. After this miracle, the disciples headed by boat for the other side of the Sea of Galilee, where many of them would have led. So I want to look at a few. We'll take this step by step, and let's look at just a few things. Number one, I want you to see why did the disciples get in the boat? Jesus told them to get in the boat. So let's look at the sending. Jesus sending them into the boat. So he worked the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, and after that, Matthew 14:22, and straightway Jesus constrained the disciples to get into a ship, go before him unto the other side. And the other side is the Sea of Galilee. You get in, you go before me, meet me on the other side. Now, John writes about the same incident in John chapter 6, and John writes that he perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him king. So after Jesus fed the 5,000 men plus women and children, fed them, miraculously fed them, then Jesus realized that some of them were coming, they want to take him by force and make him their king. What's the problem? What would be the problem with that? There's a couple of issues that come to mind, but why would Jesus get out of Dodge because they're trying to take him and set him up as their king? Well, there was a king. That would have caused some issues in and of itself, right? Think Herod would have enjoyed that? That's exactly right. They didn't. Jesus wanted them to follow him for what they could get spiritually, but they're following him for what they could get. Well, they think they want to set up this earthly kingdom. They're not worried about the spiritual kingdom. But then also, hey, this guy feeds us when we're hungry. This guy, he can meet our need, whatever problem. Let's just go follow him and let's have our physical needs met. It might have sounded noble to make him king, but it was not. Even today, Jesus wants to be Lord of our life, not for what he can do for us, but for what he's already done for us. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that the crowd wanted to make him king, he left. By the way, it's always a good idea to leave the crowd that's trying to persuade you to do what's opposite of the will of God. It's always a good idea to get out of there. But today people still put priority on material needs. This is why a lot of politicians try to appeal to our votes on the basis of material needs. Vote for me, and this is what I will do for you. And we will have the tendency to vote for the person who's going to give us what we want. Matter of fact, the politicians that stand up for morals and values and right, they don't seem to stay in politics very long. But verse 22, and straightway Jesus constrained the disciples to get into a ship and to go before him to the other side. He sent them away. John tells us that they headed toward Capernaum, which is on the northern edge of the western side of Galilee. And they needed to get out of the area themselves. And maybe Jesus was doing it for their protection. Maybe he was saying, you know what, I don't want you around these people who are trying to make me king for the wrong reasons. And then verse 23, Jesus does something interesting. When he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. Jesus gives us such a wonderful example here. Here are people who are trying to get him to do things contrary to the Father's will. And what does Jesus do? He goes up, gets along with God to make sure he's doing what his Father wants him to do. If we listen and go along with the crowd, we'll be out of the will of God pretty quickly. So Jesus sent them away. There's the sending, but then there was a problem when they got in the water. What was the problem? The storm was the problem. I told you when we were there, we were not, matter of fact, one of the videos that I sent back for you to watch in church, we were actually on the boat in the Sea of Galilee, and it was a little rockier than normal, but the clouds had moved, the sun came up. But before we get back to the dock, it got even stormier, raining a little bit, people were wearing ponchos, and so they had the ropes, the big ropes, to tie off at the dock, and they got there, and they're, the ropes on the dock, they're throwing us the ropes to tie the boat off, and the great big ropes, and 2 or 3 of the workers on the boat are, they're grabbing the rope, and the waves are hitting, and it's jerking the ropes right out of their hand, and they can't get the boat close enough to throw the rope, and then the boat gets too close, and we're slamming against the dock, and I won't say there was ever even nervousness in my part, but I was hanging on tight. And finally, I said to a couple of guys with us, I said, come on, let's help them with the rope. They get the rope, and so they threw the rope over, and one of them was trying to tie it off, and the rest of us were holding. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to hold it now. And the next wave, it's like we weren't even trying to hold it. It just like ripped it, and you're going to let it slide through your hands, for just an instant before you let it go. And we finally got it, but all those things, it wasn't a terror. It was stormy, but it wasn't anything like what they would have faced, which some believe would be like hurricane force winds. They would have that they would have faced. But regardless of that, have you ever been out in the water in a storm? You ever been? So Woods Canyon Lake up north. We'd gone on a men and boys camping trip 3 or 4 years ago, and myself and Dylan, and Brother Billy and his son Ricky, we went up to Owl Lake. We rented a little boat that had a trolling motor, and Dylan was about 8 or 9, maybe older. He might have been 10 or 11, but Ricky was about 4 or 5 years old, and we're out there, and we could see in the distance, it's cloudy over there. We better pay attention to those clouds, but we were fishing, we're having fun. Well, as it starts getting closer, and starts slipping over the sun, okay, we better start heading back in. We get a trolling motor, and we do. Well, the storm came up on us really quickly. And I'm talking about it started storming. It started hailing, and it was pelting us. It was, and lightning was flashing. I'm like, we had a little 5-mile-an-hour trolling motor. Here we are. I took the one paddle in the boat, and I'm paddling, and I made the statement. I said, and Ricky is, he's done. He's like, Dad, we're going to die. We're not going to die, son. And I said, I think we could get there quicker if we swam. And my son started taking his life vest off. No, don't get in the water. But he was trying to cover his head from the hail hitting us. And we get there, and other boats are trying to do the same thing. We're all going, trying to get there. And we get up on the dock, and there's a little awning there. And so as people are coming, we're helping people out of their boat, and we're all standing around with it's kind of one of those floating docks. And it's just, our feet are getting deeper and deeper in the water because the dock's not, more and more weight's getting on the dock. And Ricky is praying out loud, like he's praying, Lord, please save us, we're going to die. So and it gets cold on us, it's so cold. And finally it lets up enough. We all go to our vehicles, and I think Billy drove straight into town and bought some dry clothes or something. But me and Dylan got in our truck. We turned the heater on, and drove around, got warmed, and we get back to the campsite. We all meet there, And Ricky had told Billy, he said, there's only one reason we didn't die. And Ricky said, what are you talking about? Billy said, what do you mean there's only, he said, it's called, I was the only one praying. He said, so we didn't die because I was praying. In his mind, he believed that. So Ricky would say, I know what Peter's going through. I know what the apostles have gone through. I've had this same kind of problem. Verse 24 says that they were tossed with waves, for the winds were contrary. Now, understand that for this to be a storm of mention for these men, most of them who were fishermen, for guys who lived on the water, this obviously was a big deal to them. But they kept going, and it says in verse 25 that about the fourth watch of the night. Do you have any idea what time that would have been, the fourth watch? Yeah, okay, yeah. Joe and Rob, both between 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock would have been the fourth watch. And they had only made it, John chapter 6 verse 19 says they made it 5 and 20 or 30 furlongs. Do you know how long that would be? How far these furlongs are? I wouldn't know if I didn't read it. They made it about 4 miles maximum. So how far apart did I tell you at the longest point the Sea of Galilee was? 13 miles. So they started out in the early evening, verse 22, straightway Jesus constrained the disciples to get into a ship. They get into the ship, the storm happens, and it wouldn't have been the very narrowest part. It might not have been the 13 miles across, but it doesn't seem like they quite made it halfway across. They started out the evening before, and it's between 3 and 6 the next morning, and that was as far as they progressed. So obviously, they were in a very serious situation. Would you agree? I mean, here's men who know what they're doing. They know boats. They know ships. They know the Sea of Galilee. And obviously, they're in a storm. Did Jesus put them in this storm? I mean, He's the one who told them to get in the boat. He's the one who told them to go across. In all actuality, He controls the storm. Just because you're in a storm doesn't mean you're out of the will of God. The disciples were doing exactly what God told them to do. I think it was Sunday night when we were talking about Hannah and her prayer. God brings the storms to your life. God, and we like to say, well, God allows these things. And again, that's okay if that's how you have to, for your own sake. But God brings storms into our life for a myriad of reasons. But Matthew 14:25 says, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them. Many times, it is in the darkest of nights that you experience the peace of God the most. It's difficult for us to pray. But if we want to be close to Jesus, sometimes we have to pray, Lord, whatever it takes, bring me closer to you. Lord, whatever it takes for our church to be what you want it to be, Lord, bring that into our lives. Whatever it takes, Lord, for my son, my children, my spouse, whatever it takes, Lord, help us to experience you, your peace, and your joy. Sometimes that only happens through the storm. But He came unto them. He's the only one who can bring peace in the midst of the storm. And Jesus was aware of their situation. He was aware of their storm. He's always aware. He's especially going to manifest His help when we face storms because of obedience to His order. Now, think about this. The Lord is even gracious, and He helps us when we put ourselves in the storm. When we're rebellious, the Lord still offers His grace and mercy and His help. And if so He's going to help us in those situations, how much more can we count on Him when we're doing exactly what He's told us to do? And even though He came to help, I mean, here's what happened, right? Here's what the Bible says. They're in this storm, and man, they're trying, they're rowing, they're arguing over what they need to do better. I don't know. I imagine we would be like, come on, put the trolling motor back on or whatever. And they're trying, they're working. It's tiring and they're laboring. And here comes Jesus walking on the storm. They're like, yes, Jesus is here. This is wonderful. Please come help us. We're saved now. And they were automatically at peace, right? Is that what happened? That's not what happened. Verse 26, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled. Here comes a ghost. That's what they said. There's a ghost come walking up to us. And they cried out for fear. Now, there's a lot of things. We look back at the disciples, it's humorous to us. But if you had been in that boat, it wouldn't be funny, right? Here's the storms, the waves are up and down, and all of a sudden, I mean, they said, we think the same thing. Here comes a ghost. I don't believe in ghosts. There's no such thing as ghosts. Not I just don't believe in them. There's no spirits left over on this earth. When somebody dies, your spirit's in heaven with God, or your spirit's in the devil's hell. There's no ghost on this. Years ago, I knew someone who, they were ghost hunters, and they went, and I was like, that is the stupidest thing. And they said, no, let me tell you what happened. I said, that's not a ghost. I said, there are spiritual forces at work in this world, but the spiritual forces are either of God or they're of Satan. Like they're angels or demons that are unseen. But there's no such thing as ghosts. Don't argue with me about something so stupid, all right? You show a low IQ when you believe there are ghosts in this world. I don't mean that. I do. I do mean it. They were afraid. And by the way, this would cause any of us to be afraid. Believe in ghosts or not, if I was on the water, if I was on the sea in a boat in a storm in the middle of the night and I see someone walking across the water, I'm going to say there's a ghost. It would cause any of us to change a lot of what we thought. But Christ doesn't leave us in fear very long. In verse 27, guys, don't be afraid. It's me. It's just me. In the midst of their trial, it was the word of Jesus that brought comfort to their soul. And the same thing's true today. So I want you to see the prayer then. Jesus spoke. He identified himself. And immediately, Peter spoke to the Lord. And Peter answered him, verse 28, Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it's you, bid me come. If it's really you, invite me to come. Now, why did Peter make this request? Why did Peter say, Lord, if it's you, bid me come? Why do you, we're not told what it is, but what reasons would you have to think Peter?
I think because he really wanted it to be there.
I think that's right. Lord, if it's you, I know your power. I know what you can do. And if it's you, I can walk out there with you. And I think that may be part of it. Maybe, Lord, if it's really you, bid me to come. And I know if it's you, I can walk straight across the water and meet you out there. I think that's a possibility. What else might Peter have? Lord, I want to be close to you. I want to be there. Yeah, out in the water on the storm with Jesus is better than in the boat. And so very possibly Peter's like, I want to come be with you. I don't want to be in this boat anymore with these roughnecks. I want to come hang out with you, Lord. It is said that when a man requested, Alexander the Great had some man request something extraordinary for him. It was an amazing ask. And Alexander the Great quickly granted his request. And he was questioned, why did you grant this request so quick? And it said that Alexander said the request honored him because it was such a great request. And I think sometimes God is honored when we ask something so amazing from him. Our faith sometimes so small that we're asked God for little things, and we want to do little things for the Lord, which by the way is amazing that God would use us to do something small. But the greatness of Peter's request honored Jesus. And Peter had many faults, but lacking affection for Jesus was not one of them. Peter did want to be near the Lord. And so in his request, Here he asked to come unto thee. He didn't ask to walk on the water so he could show the other disciples what a sin. Let me look at me, guys. Look what I'm doing. That wasn't his reasoning. He didn't want to just enjoy some unusual experience. He wanted to be with Jesus. And it had been a rough night on the boat in the Sea of Galilee. It had been very difficult. The severity of the storm threatened their lives. Peter sees Jesus is near. I want to be near Jesus. It may be kind of like a situation when you have young children and a storm comes and the lightning's flashing and the thunder's rolling. What do children do oftentimes? If it's night and they're in bed, what do? Scream, and they come get in bed with mom and dad, right? Or they call, Mommy, Daddy, come get me. My son, when he was little, it wasn't storms that scared him so much, but he thought there was a monster under his bed. And he said, Dad, will you stay in here with me? I said, no way, I don't want that monster getting me. And I closed the door. I'm just kidding, that never happened. But you know, in moments of fear, children want to be with their parents, and we find a great refuge in Jesus. He is where the real safety is. And Peter knew that. And he was showing some submission. He said, bid me to come. It wasn't, you know, Peter gets a bad rap for being bullheaded and stubborn and self-willed. But here you see, he didn't yell at Jesus and say, I'm coming out there, I'm doing this. He was asking. He wasn't being impetuous. And he complied. A submissive heart's good for us. We need a submissive heart to be close to Jesus and to be used of Jesus. And so his request was commended, and Jesus said, come. This was Peter's invitation to come walk out on the water. Now let me ask you, was it foolish for Peter to get out of the boat and walk on the water? Was it foolish for Peter to step out of that boat? So, what if you and I go up here to Saguaro Lake? You said no already, Nicole. I didn't even ask the question yet. We all go, we get a boat, or we go up to Canyon Lake, we rent a Dolly Steamboat. Anybody ever been on a Dolly Steamboat? Don't do it in July, or June and July. I've done that. Don't do it then. Get on the Dolly Steamboat, and we go out there. What if hey guys, I just want to show you the faith I have in Jesus. What if I step over the edge of the boat? Is that foolish? Okay, Rob, you've already answered the question, but what's the difference between me doing it and Peter doing it? Jesus told Peter to do it. See, the line between faith and foolishness, faith sometimes looks foolish to people who don't understand what you're doing. But it can be foolish if Jesus hadn't told you to do it. And sometimes that's the line, is this what Jesus wants me to do? If he wants you to do it, it may look foolish, and it may be foolish in the world's eyes, in our eyes who don't understand what's going on. But Peter showed faith. If it hadn't been, all right, I'm going to set you up. If it had not been the Lord's will for Peter to get out of the boat and walk to him, would the Lord have said, come on? What if Peter had kept asking and kept asking and kept asking? Psalm 106, verse 15, he gave them their request, but sent leanness into their soul. God will grant a bad request in order to bring judgment to those making the request. But this wasn't Peter's attitude. Again, Peter wasn't trying to be stubborn or self-willed. He didn't want to show off. He just wanted to be near Jesus. Jesus knows his heart, knows his motivation. And so Jesus said, come. And I have to believe in this situation, Jesus knowing Peter's heart and mind, if Jesus said, no, Peter, you stay in the boat, I can imagine Peter would have kept himself in the boat. Don't you? I mean, and that's exactly what I think would have happened. But Peter walked a short ways on the water. And then what happens? So Jesus told him to come. Peter came down out of the ship, verse 29. He walked on the water, go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink. I don't know how far Peter walked. I don't know what was going on. But what caused Peter to sink? Doubt. Verse 31, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Now, we can't be too critical of Peter. The Lord never rebuked Peter for walking on the water. Peter got rebuked when he began to sink. He was rebuked not for stepping on the sea, but for sinking in the sea. And had Peter's faith not failed here, he would not have sunk, and his venture would have been successful. So the walk on the water was a work of faith. It wasn't foolish. He's only rebuked for his lack of faith. But before we get into his seeking, let's talk some more about the walking. There's two conditions present here in Peter's situation which we've got to respect if we're going to do the impossible. Sunday night before last, we talked about faith and doing the impossible. But what do we have to have in order to do the impossible? First of all, we've discussed it a little bit, but we need orders from God. This has got to be, for this to be faith and not folly, faith and not foolishness, it's got to come from God. Peter did not attempt this walk on the water without Christ telling him to do it. In some of our prayer requests in the beginning, when we was talking about starting this new ministry, I want to step out and do it, but I want it to be from God. I want the Lord to lead. That should be what we want to do in every area of our life. The enabling in the command gives hope. And so we got orders from God, and then when he got orders from God, he obeyed God. Can you imagine this happening? Lord, if it's you, bid me come. Okay, come on. Never mind. Like that's how we might be from time to time. Lord, I want to know what you want me to do. Tell me what I need to do. Show me what you want. Never mind. Peter accepted the orders and he was obedient. Someone said, God does not enable the disobedient to do the impossible. If we want God to do something through our life that is amazing, we've got to be obedient to God. And so once Peter received the come, he got out of the boat and he started walking to Jesus. Obedience was absolutely necessary for him to do the impossible. And he didn't delay. Delayed obedience would have cost Peter this miracle. If he'd waited a couple of days, they'd already be on the land. But he didn't wait. As soon as the command was given, he walked. Not only must we obey if we want to do the impossible, but we must obey the Lord promptly. So now let's talk a little bit about the sinking in the water. Peter started out well. He was walking along the water. After a short, I just hope the Lord shows us the scene like when we get to heaven. You know, we can all sit around and watch it on a DVD or something. Don't you wonder, like, was Peter walking up the waves and down the waves, or was he just kind of surfing on? I'd like to, don't you want to know? I'm curious. I want to know how that works. I would like to know what the Lord allowed Peter to do here. But after he walked a short way, he got distracted. He began to sink because he put his eyes on the circumstances instead of on Christ. He saw, the verse says, when he saw the winds boisterous, obviously he didn't see wind, but he saw the effects of the wind. He got his eyes off Jesus and he instead started looking at the circumstances. And your circumstances will seldom encourage you to do anything for God. Most of the time, circumstances oppose what God wants us to do. And if you concentrate on the circumstance rather than the commands of Jesus, you will be in trouble every time. Your circumstances can discourage you. Your circumstances can dishearten you. Your circumstances will halt you. It's not easy. It's easy for me to stand up here and say, don't let your circumstances get you down. Keep your eyes on Jesus. It's easy for me to say that. I like the phrase, circumstances are like mattresses. You're not supposed to be under a mattress. You're supposed to be on top of it. And you're not supposed to live under your circumstances. You live above them. I like the illustration. My dad told this illustration for years that when you get on an airplane in the middle of a storm, it may be stormy and troublesome getting up there, but if you're flying above the storm, it's some of the most beautiful flying you'll ever fly. Just so happened the very first time I went to Russia 20 years ago, got on the plane. My wife was pregnant with Dylan at the time, so it wasn't 20 years ago. It was the second time I went to Russia. She was pregnant. The lady at the desk saw her pregnant and asked if she wanted to go up to the thing with me, up there to, what do you call it, the gate. You want to go to the gate with him? And yes, I want to. She let him. She was 7, almost 8 months pregnant, and so she was showing. We get up there, and she starts crying, and she's hugging me by. I'm the rock of her life. I'm everything to her. So I was getting on a plane, and she was sad about it. And so I get on the plane. I think it was Delta Airlines, and we flew into Washington, D.C. before we went on to Moscow, and I believe that was the route at that time. And we'll get there, and I get on the plane, and there's an empty seat between me and the lady, and she said, was that your wife? And I was like, no, just some pregnant lady. Started hugging me there in the, obviously I told her the story. It's our first son. She's emotional, and I'm leaving for a couple of weeks. So we started talking. She said, what are you doing? Why are you going to Russia? What's going on? So she happened to be on the plane because she was headed to see her dad had passed away, and she had been estranged from her dad. She never made the relationship right for years. And she said I was going to get on this plane, and I was going to buy every drink they would give me, and I was going to drink myself to sleep and fly. And here I'm sitting beside a Baptist preacher on the plane. And so we talked the whole 4 hours or whatever. That day happened to be a terrible stormy day. We were a little late leaving. It was a lot of turbulence getting up, but really, that moment when we got above the clouds, it was almost like a gasp on the plane. It was that beautiful. The sun was skimming across the clouds, and it was just billowy white. It really was a beautiful. And I took that illustration and I used it. Like, you don't know what God's doing. You're in a storm now, but God sees from above the storm. And that's a great illustration. It was wonderful at that moment for her, and it's good to tell. It's an easy illustration when you're preaching, but it's easy to say that, but when you're in that storm, when you're not above the clouds and it's raining and it's storming and you're soaking wet and it's hailing on you and you can't get anything done because of the storm and your insides are torn up. You can't eat like you're supposed to, and you lay your head on your pillow and you can't go to sleep. And I do what you're supposed to do when you can't sleep. Something's on your mind. Often I'll get out of bed and I'll pray and I'll say, Lord, help this person be in this situation. And I sometimes will even pray that Lord will calm my nerves, but that's not the point. And then sometimes I lay my head down and I still can't sleep. It's still bothering me, And so it's easy to preach it. It's easy to say it. We know that's right, that in the circumstances, God is still in control, but it's still frustrating and it's still hard. And so we'll focus on that, and we won't focus on Christ. And even in our praying, somebody years ago asked me, going through a situation, they said, well, are you praying about it? I said, absolutely, of course I'm praying about it. They said, is that all you're praying about? Is that the focal point of all your prayers? Well, yeah, it kind of is. Well, then if that's all I'm praying about is my circumstance, my problem, I'm not praising the Lord. I'm not honoring the Lord in my prayer. I'm not remembering all the things He's done for me. Because I'm focused. I'm praying about it. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But I'm just praying about this, and I forgot what the Lord has done for me. And we focus on it, and we focus on it, and it tears us up when Jesus is standing right there. Peter had the Lord, the creator of the universe, the one who made the seas, the one who brought the storm, and he's focused on the problem rather than the solution. So he showed fear instead of faith. He started his walk on water by faith in the Word, but it ceased when he got afraid. Verse 30, he was afraid and began to sink. I don't know if fear is the opposite of faith. I know we say that, and that's... I think in my fear sometimes I show the greatest faith. And I don't know, I'm not discounting, I'm not saying that the more faith we don't have less fear. But sometimes in our fear, we just need to continue to trust the Lord. There are many fears. And listen, Peter, we can say, Peter, you didn't show enough faith there. But you know what? None of the other disciples got out of the boat. They stayed in the boat. I think it was Dr. David Gibbs who preached a message one time, get out of the boat. Just get out of the boat. He got out. He showed faith. It was little faith, but it was faith. And then lastly, and we're done, you see the Savior. Peter's sinking in the sea did not lead to disaster. When he began to sink, he did exactly what you and I do when we're sinking. Lord, save me. And the Lord looked at Peter for a little while and let him struggle for a while, and then he reached out and saved him, right? Actually, it says in verse 31, and immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand. You focus on the Lord. What a great picture of the gospel this is. There's the need of salvation, the need to be saved. There's the source, who is Jesus. There's the grace of salvation and the immediacy of salvation. When we turn to the Lord, He saves us. Did Peter have a good excuse to doubt? Did he have a good excuse to doubt the Lord? Yeah, when you add that last little phrase on there, it makes it, there's never an excuse to doubt the Lord. Humanly speaking, yeah, I understand. But verse 31, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt, Peter? Peter had no excuse, and neither do we. We have many spiritual advantages. How big does our faith have to be? Matthew 17:20, faith the size of a grain of mustard seed. Peter had little faith. Peter sunk, but Peter did something that most of us have never even thought about doing. Peter walked on the water. God used him to do the impossible. Peter showed great faith. Peter had some stumbles, but he stumbled falling forward. He always trusted the Lord. He trusted the Lord. I say always. He always came back to the Lord. His eyes were on the Lord. When he stumbled, Lord, I need your help. Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. Lord, help us to show faith in who you are and what you're doing in our lives. Lord, do something big in our lives. Use us to do what only you can do. In your name we pray. Amen.